Esto es Echoes of Climate Change. Reflexiones, análisis e indagaciones sobre conocimientos y acciones de las comunidades rurales en el escenario del cambio climático de costa a cordillera. Echoes of Climate Change. Hi, hello everyone, welcome back to Echoes of Climate Change. In this episode, we retake our conversation with Mariana Lazzaro, Enrique Mundaca and Beaux Berkeley. As a way for furthering into what this project is about, now we are exchanging ideas about human and animal welfare in the face of climate change and how it is related to agricultural practices and communities, as these are also some of the reasons why Beaux joined ECOS as an international researcher. So, let us now listen how she accounts us of both her research and work as a biologist and introduces herself.
My name's Beaux Berkeley. I'm a conservation biologist with a specialty in wildlife reproductive physiology and endocrinology. So I'm very interested in saving endangered species, and I have to understand how they reproduce in order to best figure out what approaches would be most impactful for them. And as I've grown in my knowledge and experiences, I've realized that conservation is not really about the animals. It's about the people and the communities with the animals. And understanding what people want and how we can help them and how we can all live together is what's interesting me now. And the approach that I model that I appreciate the most is the One Health model, which is a way of looking at the impacts of human health, wildlife health, and environmental health as one system, and what's good for one is good for all. So when Enrique and Mariana invited me to this project, it fits in so well with my own personal philosophies and experiences, and I think that the lens that is being used in this project has the potential to really be transformative and bring new information not only to Chile but to other cultures like they alluded to. So we can all learn from each other by this very simple method of getting out to communities and listening to them and talking with them.
But what's reproductive biology?
Reproductive biology, I mean, I study sex. It's fabulous. And the thing that's so fun about it is it's so complicated and it's so different across species and in different environments that it's endlessly fascinating to me. And it's just always been a really interesting topic for me.
Besides fun and health, as Beaux told us, there are also other reasons for a biological approach to sex and reproduction.
So there's different motivations. If you're a farmer, you want to be able to produce the best output, whatever that is. You want to be most efficient. Now we're really realizing sustainability is also a very important component that we need to impact. The effect of climate change on production has been huge, and we're also needing to learn new information about how animals reproduce, how not only animals but us respond to our environments, so we can keep different animals around, whether it's wildlife or production animals, or even our own reproduction. We're finding humans are also impacted by climate change and other environmental impacts.
Can you give us an example, like to people like me, because I'm trying to see how climate change can actually impact reproductive behavior. I can't, come up with anything because.
Okay, so a huge example would be heat stress in dairy cows. Mm-hmm. So as farms become hotter and more humid, that impacts the ability of the cows to convert their feed, what feed is available to them on pasture. And that impacts how much milk they produce, their ability to recover after giving birth, to shorten the calving intervals. So what may be good producing milk-wise may not be the best suitable for the environment. So those are questions farmers have to deal with on a daily basis.
Echoing the idea that climate change has had a huge impact on reproduction, I pointed out how that theme appeared in relation to young humans in our conversations with Andrea Casals and Sofia Rosa Rivero, who are part of Echoes of Climate Change.
That's a great point.
I think that's what psychologists call the climate anxiety, and it leads migration waves as well. Like there are people who migrate because they learned that like where the hotspots of climate change are, and they live there, and so they move to other places because of climate change anxiety, and it's also tied to reproductive behavior in humans. So it's a very valid point and something we would probably need to start thinking quite soon.
So there's in Africa and different parts of Asia, as we see climate effects happening, we see increased human migration. And so we see people going to the cities, leaving the land. We see young men without skills or education who are becoming mercenaries essentially, and so we're seeing increased human conflict. We're seeing increased gender violations because of it. I mean, it's crazy to think about how the climate's affecting human behavior, and it breaks my heart to think about young people not wanting to reproduce, because as a reproductive biologist, that's the end goal, is how do we increase biodiversity or genetic diversity within our species by reproducing, and how do we maintain the health of the human species by reproducing, and we're having this constriction in what's happening to human reproduction, and there's a ton of environmental impacts like plastics and heat stress and everything else that is a little outside of the scope of this discussion that's really fun to talk about too.
And then, Beaux, what can you share from your experience about how people relate agricultural practices to welfare, health, and climate?
So I've worked in Africa and Asia and Australasia and the US, and things that I've found is common in everybody that I've met is everybody likes a good meal and a laugh. I mean, everybody likes a good story. Everybody likes to sit around the table. And, these two are perfect examples of good storytelling and good food. And
Thank you.
how do we continue to do that? And how do we learn from each other what each other's needs are? So in Zimbabwe, for example, clean water, jobs, and food is very important. How do we get all those? Now I'm working in Cleveland, Ohio, in a city environment, and what's the needs? Clean water, access to food, and jobs. It's a different context, but it's the same questions. And I'm curious to see my experiences here. Are the same questions happening here? And by being able to have these conversations and this methodology that they've developed, I think we can better get to those answers. But the most important thing is to listen to people in the communities and what do they want, and then figure out how we can all work together to deliver it.
Another question I had for Beaux was if she had observed any differences between wild and domestic animals.
I think it's a question of scale, because there's so many more domestic animals like poultry, swine, cattle than wildlife. Most of our vertebrate biomass is in domestic animals. So we're trying to produce them to be food and other resources for people. So the values that we ascribe for why we're doing that are different than the values for wildlife. And so we use the same approaches for, keeping an animal healthy, keeping a flock healthy, keeping a herd healthy, keeping a population healthy. but the motivations are very different. And sometimes it's hard to say if you're living in an environment where wildlife are significant predators or threats to your livelihood, what's the motivation for keeping them? So in Zimbabwe, for example, I had 12 master students that I was teaching conservation biology to, and I'm an American. I see elephants in zoos. I see them as these cute, magnificent, intelligent animals, and I want to help and save them. And so in Zimbabwe, where they have, I think, about 40,000 African elephants, maybe more, they're afraid of them. They don't want them around. An elephant can wipe out your family's livelihood in one evening if a herd of elephants come through and eat all your crops. And that means you don't eat. You can't pay for your children's school. So I asked these 12 students, how many of you know someone who has been injured or killed by an elephant? And 4 students raised their hands. So these are people who are frontline conservation biologists who have direct impact with being killed by elephants. So what's the motivation to save them when these are scary, really threatening animals? And so that's something that I needed to experience for myself to understand that now I can go back to my peers in the States and say, you know, we wiped out all our large mammals and predators in the States. We don't have to worry about going on a walk at night and, you know, my friend's uncle, a hippo came out of the pond when he was walking his dog, broke his leg. And this man's 60 years old. He can no longer be a farmer. He almost lost his life, but he can't walk anymore. So I don't have to worry about that in Cleveland, you know?
Yes, yeah.
So how do we help people live in these situations?
That's something that connects very well to what I was saying when I said, you know, like keeping your mind open when you approach communities, because it's usually we come, as Beaux was saying, we come from, you know, urban areas, and we come with our scientific, you know, ideals and values, and then when you get there, you see that it's completely different. They have a completely different perception of things, and being open and saying, okay, maybe, you know, like we need to find another way or do it in, you know, do something else. Maybe that's not what they are interested in, and how can I help them achieve what they want and at the same time achieve my goal of being, you know, I don't know, having this conservationist, as you said, goals in mind and so on. It's really hard, but it's important to be open, because we also worked with, you know, like sometimes with groups of researchers who are, you know, like quite biased by the way they and what they are looking, and they only publish what, you know, agrees with, you know, like maybe I'm, you know, like stepping on somebody's feet here, but it's true, you know. So being open and working with the communities and hearing what they have to say is really important, and it changes your perspective of things. As Beaux was saying, it's really that experience is so valuable. And that's related to the talk that she will give you tomorrow at the in Talca.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about this reality shock that many scientists have when they interact with communities. I was lucky enough to do my master's in conservation biology, so that kind of prepared me a little bit to what I was going to find in the future. You know, I did this to South and in New Zealand. So in those days, we studied a lot of the interaction between Maori culture, Pakeha culture, which is the European whites in New Zealand, and environment and biodiversity. But normally what I would say is that it's very difficult for scientists to get rid of their own bias. Opening your mind sounds easy if you say it, but it's not that easy when you go and face the truth with the communities. Particularly, for example, I can give you the example of the economic system. You know, lots of, you know, let us say urban scientists, or more like you know, scientists that work at the academia. They're quite idealistic and trying to preserve some practices, you know, but sometimes or many times those practices, even though it can be like a cultural heritage practice, like something very important to preserve, but that's not very comfortable for the people that actually practice those things, because life is difficult for them. And as Beaux was saying, in the context of such as Zimbabwe, a rural farmer in Zimbabwe, breaking a leg is a life-threatening situation. And we don't consider that if we live in an urban developed environment. So I think one of the important things of this project is that it will allow us to open our minds. And I think we have the first step that we have achieved in order to get into this open-mindedness is the fact that we are lots of people from different areas that so far within this last year we have been able to communicate without major problems. We have poets talking to ecologists, okay? and it can be difficult sometimes, but not for us. For some reason, we managed to create a really good team. And we are open-minded, so I don't think we're going to struggle that much, although I think we will struggle at some stage. But yes, trying to perceive reality and to always trying to step into the toes of other people, trying to, into the shoes of other people and trying to see reality from their point of view. And that's one of the most valuable things of this project, to sit there, to take the time to listen to them and to understand how small or short is our view of the world sometimes, even though we think we kind of understand the world, but it's not always that the case. So it's a good exercise to be a little bit more humble. And I would recommend that to every single scientist. It's important sometimes to become more humble and to try to see the world from a different point of view.
Perhaps, as it deals with scientific biases and open-mindedness, you could take a further approach to how working with communities in your experience can be related to climate change?
Sure. So I'm a big fan of technology. Some part of my work has been developing new ways of contracepting wildlife and humans, and so I use a lot of techniques to evaluate animal health, and I like developing the technology. That's something that's very satisfying to me, developing new methodology. But humans have evolved over tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of years to be living sustainably within this environment. I think one of the advantages or disadvantages of technology is that it can shortcut that relationship. So to increase production or to do intensive genetic breeding for selection of certain traits, we've been selecting for certain traits within domestic species for tens of thousands of years, but now we can do it with techniques like CRISPR-Cas1 or artificial insemination, where we can keep selecting for different, even having databases of reproductive output or milking numbers or intercalf intervals, that our impact on species is out of a line with how they would evolve or adapt within an environment. And so I think listening to farmers who are really on the land and who have traditional practices, whether it's indigenous or multi-generational farms, really helps us understand what works best for that environment. The problem is with rapid climate change, we're not able to, we don't have a history of how do we adapt to this rapid climate change. And so people look at technology as a short circuit or a short-term way to get to those answers. And I worry that we lose native husbandry practices in that. And then the other thing is that, if we destroy the nutrients of the land or the pasture or whatever, it also impacts the associated wildlife. And as we do more intensive cultural practices, we have increased risk for diseases, we have increased waste issues. And so we're really accelerating potential damage. And so how do we go back to more sustainable approaches? And I think that's one of the advantages of getting out in the communities and listening to stories and listening to even the poetry, which would have, years of rural experiences in them.
Before thanking everyone for being present and closing this conversation, I had a final question with two faces to understand Beau's linkage and collaboration with Echoes of Climate Change. Why did you accept the invitation and why did you invite her?
So I met Mariana and Enrique while we were doing our PhDs together in New Zealand. Enrique invited me to assist him in the field when he was studying moths. And I study elephants and rhinos, and I like having these great adventures. And Enrique made moths just as fascinating as rhinos and elephants. And I've never forgotten that. And I'm like, whatever you need me to do, I am there, because I know it's going to be fun. We're going to get great output, and I'm going to learn something that I never thought about before.
That's great. And I imagine the question for me, why I invited Beaux? Well, there are a number of reasons. The first one is that, of course, we met in New Zealand. We got along very well, which is a crucial factor in working together. Human relations are important. So you have to have some affinity with a researcher. I invited her because I've been following her career since we left New Zealand. We've been in touch regularly, and I've seen all the work that she has done in South Africa and Zimbabwe and during the last times in the United States. And when we were actually formulating this project, I thought immediately of her. I said, well, if there is anybody that has been in contact with rural communities in a very harsh environment, which is threatened by climate change, that's Maule or Berkeley. Okay, so she was one of my number one guests actually to collaborate. And actually, this is not the first invitation. I think we invited her to the previous Anichos project, but we couldn't do too much work because of the pandemic. In 2020, do you remember that lots of plans were disrupted, particularly all the field work and everything was disrupted. So I had that kind of sensation that something didn't work not because of us, of course, it was an external situation, something that we couldn't control. That's the reason why I thought of Beaux. And I think her insights are going to be quite interesting, actually, for the project and for the community. In Chile, even though if you look at the world map, Chile is not that far from Africa, geographically speaking, in terms of distance, but culturally speaking, we are different worlds. So actually, it's very interesting that for me, I see I've never been to Africa as one of my dreams, actually. It's a childhood dream. And going to Africa for me is something that it looks quite far away, actually, okay, like from my possibilities. But I keep on traveling and going to Europe, which is which is very far, I mean, if you compare it to Africa. So yeah, that's one reason, of course. We wanted to hear about Beau's experience in Africa. We want her to talk to our community, our university here about her experience in Africa, because I think it's going to be quite interesting for everybody, for the audience tomorrow at the seminar. So yeah, those are the reasons.
Finally, let me thank you all for carefully listening to these episodes of Echoes of Climate Change, which is part of the ANID ATE 230028 Anillos project. This interdisciplinary research project is developed by the Universidad Católica del Maule, the Universidad de Concepción, and the Universidad Finisterra, and is funded by ANID, the National Agency for Research and Development. And of course, a big thank you to Enrique, Mariana, and Beaux for the experiences and knowledge shared here. My name is Antonio, and I'm saying goodbye while inviting you to follow us on our social media at Echoes of Climate Change and visit our website echoesofclimatechange.cl.
Echoes of Climate Change hace parte de las actividades interdisciplinarias de divulgación e investigación del proyecto Biodiversidad de Costa a Montaña, un estudio socioambiental de las comunidades rurales, prácticas ecoculturales en un escenario de cambio climático. Un proyecto Anillos de Investigación en Áreas Temáticas Especiales financiado por la Agencia Nacional de Investigación y Desarrollo, realizado por investigadoras e investigadores de la Universidad Católica del Maule, la Universidad de Concepción y la Universidad Finisterra.